Welcome to The Explainer, where we bypass the fluff and get right into the architectural blueprints of modern democracy. Today, we're zooming in on exactly how India built its government. Think of this as stepping onto the construction site of the world's largest democracy, looking closely at the schematics and figuring out exactly why the builders made the choices they did. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Two blueprints of democracy. 2. The mechanics of the parliamentary system. 3. Merits versus demerits. 4. Why India chose it. And finally, India versus Britain. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Two blueprints of democracy. So imagine you're building a democracy from scratch. You basically have to answer one massive, fundamental philosophical question. Do you choose stability or do you choose responsibility? If you look around the world today, democratic governments generally fall into two major categories, presidential or parliamentary. And the dividing line between them comes down to this exact question. Do you want a government that is rigidly stable, or do you want one that is relentlessly responsible to its lawmakers? Well, a major answer to that question is the parliamentary system, which you'll often hear called the Westminster model. Named after the historic Westminster building sitting by the River Thames in London, this system is rooted in a very specific, absolutely crucial principle. The government, like the people actually running the country day to day, must constantly answer to the elected lawmakers. The executive is entirely responsible to the legislature for literally all its policies and actions. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sort of split personality of the leadership. In a parliamentary system, you have a dual executive. On one hand, you have the de jure head, that's the nominal or titular head of state, like a president or a monarch, and they serve mostly ceremonial roles. But then you have the de facto head. This is the real working head of government, usually the prime minister, who actually holds the driving wheel and has the real power to run the nation. Moving on to Section 2, Mechanics of the Parliamentary System. Political scientists have this brilliant way of explaining the power dynamic here. They often say, the sword of the administration is with the executive, but the purse of the administration is with the legislature. It perfectly illustrates how the Prime Minister's cabinet has the sword to execute laws and actually run the administration, but they can't do anything. They can't move an inch without the Parliament handing them the purse of resources, money, and approval. They are fundamentally tied together. So here is how that connection actually plays out on the ground in India. First, citizens head to the polls and elect 543 members of Parliament to the lower house, known as the Lok Sabha. Whichever party or coalition wins the majority of those seats goes to the president and claims the right to form a government. From that majority, the prime minister then selects a council of ministers, usually about 70 to 80 people. It's so different from the U.S. system where the president and Congress are elected completely separately. Here, the executive is literally born right out of the legislature. They are lawmakers first and ministers second. And that brings us to Article 75 of the Indian Constitution, which is the absolute bedrock of this entire setup: collective responsibility. Because the executive is born from the parliament, they are collectively accountable to it. Basically, they swim together and they sink together. If a no-confidence motion gets passed by the lower house, it doesn't just kick out one bad minister. The entire government falls at once. They simply cannot govern without the continuous confidence of the parliament. Which brings us to Section 3, Merits versus Demerits. It's a massive trade-off, right? On the plus side, you get incredible harmony between branches, plus a diverse cabinet that really actively prevents a dictatorship. But man, that comes at a heavy cost, extreme instability. To put that into perspective, we have literally seen an Indian government collapse in just 13 days. Add in the risk of amateur ministers trying to run a highly technical departments, and you quickly realize just how delicate this balancing act truly is. Despite those risks, though, the accountability factor is just immense. And this accountability comes to life vividly during parliamentary sessions. It's not just dry policy reading. It is vibrant debate and deliberation. You look back at the famously sharp, poetically charged debates between former leaders like Sushma Swaraj and Manmohan Singh. They would actually use poetry and couplets to question the administration and hold them accountable in real time. This constant, relentless questioning is exactly what ensures that government remains a servant of the people and not its master. Section 4, Why India Chose It. Given that risk of collapse, why go this route? The architect of the Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, answered this directly. He profoundly recognized that a newly independent nation just couldn't risk a tyrannical executive. He knew perfectly well that no system guarantees both perfect stability and perfect responsibility, so he made a conscious choice. He decided that a government in a brand new democracy must be relentlessly responsible to the people, even if it meant sacrificing some stability along the way. But, there were some really intense practical reasons, too. India already had decades of familiarity with British legislative traditions before independence, so it wasn't a totally alien concept. Plus, framers like Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel knew they had to avoid the kind of legislative executive gridlock you often see in the U.S. system. A developing nation simply couldn't afford that. But perhaps most crucially, just think about India's sheer scale. They understood that this system's capacity for wide representation was absolutely the best way to unite countless diverse regions, religions, and communities into one functioning nation. Finally, Section 5, India versus Britain. So India adopted this, but they didn't just blindly copy-paste the British model. They customized it. The most glaring, fundamental difference is right at the very top. India is a republic. That means the head of state is an elected citizen. Anyone, even someone from an incredibly humble background like President Draupadi Murmu, can actually rise to the highest office in the land. Britain, on the other hand, relies on a hereditary monarchy, meaning their head of state is determined by birthright, like King Charles. We also see some wild mechanical shifts between the two. In Britain, Parliament is totally supreme, but India intentionally put a leash on its lawmakers using a written constitution and the Supreme Court. Here's a really unique difference. India actually allows a complete non-MP to be appointed as a minister, as long as they manage to scramble and win a seat within 6 months. And unlike Britain, which keeps a shadow cabinet waiting in the wings to take over at a moment's notice, India just scrapped that concept entirely. So, as you process these two blueprints and look at how India adapted this democratic machinery, ask yourself this. When building a nation, is absolute parliamentary power safer because it perfectly reflects the majority? Or were the Indian framers incredibly wise to put a constitutional leash on their own lawmakers? It is a fascinating question that continues to shape the destiny of over 1 billion people today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I encourage you to keep questioning the architecture of the world around you.